Hey everybody, it's Casey Kasem here, bringing you a brand new episode of Get Real with Casey Kasem. It's the podcast that goes behind the scenes of the fantasy football industry through interviews with people in the fantasy football space. For this episode, I got to chat with Eric Romoff, founder of the Pros with Joes Charity League. You can check out Pros with Joes at proswithjoes.com. If you've ever wanted to co-manage a fantasy football team with your favorite fantasy pro, now is your chance. And if you want to co-manage a team with me this season, you can check out my direct link at proswithjoes.rallyout.com/Casey. I'm supporting Dallas Dogger this season, so please go check out the link and donate for a chance to co-manage a team with me. Of course, Eric and I talked all about Pros with Joes. We also talked about how to add charity aspects to your league, the Texas snow apocalypse of 2021, contributing to Dr. Roto, and going for 2.com, being a dad, and much more. You can follow Eric on Twitter at FantasyNav, as well as Pros with Joes at Pros with Joes. You can find me on Twitter at TheCaseyKasem. You can follow the pod on Twitter at GetReal_pod. You can find my writing with the Fantasy Footballers at thefantasyfootballers.com. I am now the social media manager for Dynasty Trade Calculator as well, so go check them out. This podcast is a proud member of the DAP Network. Hey, the podcast also has a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Casey Kasem. If you want to go over there and help grow the show, that'd be so awesome. A few bucks a month is all you need to donate to come be a part of the Stay Rad crew. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you become a member, you'll get to help submit questions for guests, you'll get exclusive content, a look at the new merch line that's about to drop, which is so exciting, and a ton more. Right now, the Patreon is in its beginning stages, but I'm planning on it being something awesome, so just keep an eye out and go check it out. If you want to help grow the show even more, make sure to rate and review the podcast. Doing that really helps. It might not seem like it does, but it is one of the coolest and most helpful things that you could do. Thank you so much to Trophy Smack for being an affiliate of Get Real with Casey Kasem. This is the spot to check out if you're looking for fantasy football trophies, belts, rings, draft boards, and more. I have an affiliate link that I'll put down in the description. You can check it out in order to view all the rad items that they have. There's free shipping, free engraving, and 100% satisfaction guaranteed. I've been a fan of theirs for a while. They're really cool people over there, so go check them out. Make sure to use the discount code GetRealPod for a free ring with the purchase of a trophy or belt. Note that you have to have both the trophy or belt plus the ring in your cart for the discount to apply. Live draft season is here. It's here, so what are you waiting for? And now, here's my talk with Eric Romoff. Oh man, here we are, getting to chat about some fun stuff today. I'm excited about this one. Eric, this is Eric. Eric, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. We're officially a few nights removed from the start of Hard Knocks airing, so that's when it feels like football season is really upon us, right? So things are starting to move fast and get pretty exciting in our worlds.
And I am just so excited about everything that's been going on. The fact that Hard Knocks is Cowboys and that's my team, and we'll get into all of that. We'll get into everything. But we all know this is a fantasy football podcast per se. This is more of a behind the scenes look. And you have a very interesting thing that we haven't really, I've had Scott Fish on to talk about the Scott Fish Bowl. I've had people come on and talk about charity leagues, but this charity league that I'm going to talk to you about in a little bit, you guys are here about Pros with Joes. But I want to talk to Eric first. I want to get a little behind the scenes look at Eric because you guys and gals may not know who he is. And I think that he could probably help out those of you that are trying to get involved with more charity leagues, those of you that are trying to, get support in the community for donations and getting people jazzed about that kind of stuff. And he does a whole lot of stuff in the fantasy industry that's awesome. So Eric, I want to know, we're going to go back to the very beginning. I want to go back to the beginning and ask you, when you were growing up, were you into sports? Were you into football? What was all of that like?
Certainly not as much as I am now. I, like Casey, am a Texan, so it's kind of hard not to have football kind of injected into your life from the get-go. I played a little bit of football in high school, but I was a bit more of the kind of skater, stoner music crowd than I was like sports jock crowd. It really wasn't until I got a little bit older that I started to appreciate some of the more kind of nuanced aspects of sport.
Did you come across fantasy football? What way? How did that all come about? How did that come into your life?
Man, so in a past life, I used to work at a national mattress chain. When I was in college, I was like a porter there, right? So I was the poor guy that had to throw mattresses on my shoulder and tie them down to people's trucks. Um, and in one of our like weekly meetings, there was this big commotion with a group of 12 guys that worked there. They were talking about their upcoming league, and specifically like voting on some new rules and changing their constitution. So that was like where I got introduced to it. I'd heard of the concept before, but I never really like seen it up close and personal. I mean, this was uh, 18 years or so ago. And so, like the incredibly rude person that I am, I just kind of butted into their conversation and tried to figure out what was going on. And they told me about it. And actually, one of the people who played for a while wasn't too happy with some of the rule changes. They were actually moving over to PPR from standard scoring, which wasn't his bag. And that opened up a spot a few weeks later. They randomly like quizzed me on my NFL knowledge to like see if I at least had like a baseline understanding. And I guess I nailed the quiz, and they let me in. So this was like I said, about 17 or 18 years ago. And every year my interest and involvement has just kind of grown by an order of magnitude, right? One league to two to 5 to 10 to too many to count.
Well, I was going to ask you if you knew how many leagues you're in. When people are like, I'm in 97 leagues, I'm like, wow, you know an exact number. So do you know an exact number, or you really don't?
Yeah, so I do know an exact number. I'm thinking, I'm like mentally going through all of the emails that I probably haven't regarded.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I need to get back to Chris. So my list is pretty short. I think I'm in like 9 right now.
Okay. Yeah.
About 3 or 4 years ago, I started paring back a lot of my home leagues and kind of rolling that first into like some NFFC and kind of higher stake stuff, and then eventually into more of a DFS bankroll. So my seasonal leagues have been kind of cleaned up over the last few years, and then specifically with running the charity league last year. I mean, I was damn near absentee. I would just disregard a lot of my home leagues, much to the chagrin of my drinking buddies and some guys that we've been in a dynasty league with for a while. But I really wasn't ready for the level of responsibility that came into managing 50 some odd teams and
Yeah.
100 or so people. So despite my desire to say yes to every league, I've really tried to keep it pretty tight, so that way it doesn't reach into and impact the quality of the charity league.
Well, that's good advice too for anybody that's looking to be in a bunch of leagues and also wants to like be in charge of something big. That you need to know that time is something that you have to learn to handle. There's never enough hours in the day, and you have to learn how to. So, I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, just in general, right? Like it's something that I've personally had to learn the hard way, like the ability or the right to say no to stuff, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think as people, we inherently like want to help and want to accommodate, right? So like someone brings you something at work, someone brings you a new project, someone brings you a new fantasy league, you're like, hell yeah, love to help out. And then you get into it and it's like, oh shit, I did not have enough time for this. And now I'm going to be a bad manager, or I'm going to do poorly on this project or whatever it might be. So yeah, I mean, something that I definitely had to learn the hard way myself.
So let's talk about this charity league. It is a big deal. I love the whole idea behind it. I love everything about it. So there are people out there that have been living under rocks and they don't know what this league is all about. So I want to start off and ask you first, how did you come up with the concept of Pros with Joes, and tell everybody exactly what that concept is?
Yeah. So Pros with Joes is a charity fantasy football league. Um, the sort of premise behind it is, as opposed to sort of these expert or listener leagues that pit everyday players against industry experts, we're actually pairing them up. So every single team in our league is a pairing of co-managers. One of them is a pro, an industry expert, and the other is a Joe, an everyday player, someone that might subscribe to their website or read their content. So it's a really cool dynamic in that you get to have this fully fledged expert league, right? Pros from every single platform: ESPN, NFL Network, Yahoo, the fantasy footballers. I mean, you name it, we've got representation everywhere. Are pairing off with the readers and followers that that trust their advice. So it's super cool to see that sort of level of access and how much interest it garners. It's almost kind of like a master class in fantasy football, right? They get to ride shotgun with the expert that they trust and see, how they make roster decisions, or how they determine who to target on waivers, or how much of their fab to spend on a player, right? Like all these little things that that go into managing a successful fantasy franchise. They're right there contributing to that conversation and seeing it happen in action. So that's sort of the confine, right? In terms of how it came to be, I guess in a fairly apropos way, Dave Richard, who was our eventual champion for year one last year, he actually suggested on one of his podcasts that he would be open to splitting or sharing his team in their experts league with one of their listeners. So I heard that. I pinged him, asked if that was something that he thinks that we could kind of scale out. He said that he would be interested, and really just kind of started spreading the word from there. We got a super late start. I think we started socializing this idea like 16 or 17 days before the season started last year. But I mean, it just took off like wildfire, right? We got more and more people that were interested in participating. They told some of the people that they worked with, and before long, we ended up with 56 pros in our first year, and we raised a little less than $10,000.
That's super awesome. And I realized that it was put together pretty quick, not put together pretty quickly, I guess. Yeah, 16, 17 days, you said, I do remember that it did feel kind of rushed, but you knew that. But it was so awesome how it exploded just in that small period of time. So this year, now being the second year, I can only assume that it's going to grow and grow. How did you go about spreading the word? I know you said people would tell their people and all that jazz, but you had some really big names. So how did that process happen?
Yeah. So funny enough, last year, the person who I attribute kind of the biggest role in the explosion, right? Because when this all came together, like we thought we would be lucky to have 9 or 10 people that would want to participate, right? Like I was going to have to pretend to be a fantasy expert in this league, right? But oddly enough, the person who really kind of lit the match for us was someone who didn't have time to play themselves, and that was Marcus Grant from NFL Network. In life, certainly in the nonprofit world, you have to be comfortable with making the ask, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as we started getting some traction, just started filling up people's DMs and direct messaging them and tweeting at them to see if they want to participate. And Marcus got back to us. The timing didn't work out, but he was like, "Hey, I love your idea. Let me tag you into Adam Rank. Let me tag you into Matt Harmon," and really just kind of opened up his contact list to us. and made some introductions that really kind of got the excitement building, right? At first, it seemed like we were barely going to scrape together enough people to participate. But then you get some of the legends in our industry involved, and all of a sudden,
Mm-hmm.
Over the course of a few days, we went from scraping and begging for people to join us to now people are reaching out to us. This sounds awesome. How do I get involved? Can I be one of your pros? So we very quickly went to a point where we were having to put people on standby or get them queued up for next year. So it just took off like wildfire. It was a fun ride. It was probably a little irresponsible to try to whip it together that quickly, but whatever. We're here now.
You guys are risk takers, and I like it a lot, especially when charity's involved. You know what? You can take a little bit of a risk. And what did you learn? What was the biggest thing that you learned from doing it in the first year that you're going to take with you into the second year? Maybe grow, branch off of that idea.
Yeah, I think so. So one of the things that we're doing differently this year is we're actually scaling back the number of teams.
Okay.
We had interest to really expand as much as we wanted to, but I wanted to really hold dear the quality of the experience, right? Like,
right.
Raising money for charity is fantastic, and it's certainly the main charter that we set out with, right? But also, I want to create or help facilitate at least a really cool kind of life experience for fantasy players, right? And I was a little concerned that if we scaled too quickly, that it might get kind of hands off, right?
Right.
So that's one thing that I really highlighted heading into the off season after year one is like, how do we make sure that everyone that's participating is all the way in? They're chatting with their co-manager. They're participating. They're not vacating their team. So that was something that is certainly different in year two. Trying to be a bit more kind of specialized in how we're thinking about it.
And I like that a lot because it really is cool to be able to bring together the pro and the Joe and have that bond there that we like. I still talk to the same, the guy that I had, Michael, last year. We still talk. He still asks me for fantasy advice. I still tell him, this, that, and the other. And, if you want to still take my advice after, he trusts me. So we made it pretty far last year. But how cool is it to see that the pros and the Joes, and they're just like coming together, and it's just like conversations, and they seem like they've known each other forever. How cool is it to see that?
Man, it's mind-boggling. Just in sort of the concept, right? Like, we had people that were cancers or are cancer survivors, and would listen to a particular analyst while they're getting chemo. And so when I called to tell them that they won, they got emotional, right? Like it was a super personal connection for them. When I pinged Adam Rank to come back in year two, I asked him how his partner Justin's doing, and these guys who were complete strangers a year ago just vacationed together this summer because they're like BFFs in real life. So like these stories are awesome, right? Like that level of connection is something that I definitely hold dear, and is really what I'm hoping to facilitate as we carry forward on this journey.
I wish that there was something like this when I was first getting into fantasy football, when I was first listening to like podcasts and stuff, because it really is cool to be able to hang out with somebody that you look up to. Being able to do that with a pro is like a dream come true, and I would have loved to have been able to do that when I was a fan, coming up. So if you could have like one dream person be a pro, and it doesn't have to be an analyst or anything, it could just be like a celebrity, or we'll call them a celebrity, or instead of a pro, we'll call them whatever you want to call them. Who is somebody that you would just think, this is right up your alley, you should do this is perfect for you?
Man, I'm really bad with favorites and lists. So I'll probably fire off a name and then look to like amend it, or maybe see if you can clean it up in post production.
Post production.
One
Oh,
one
sorry.
person that I've been chasing down, and I don't think it'll come to fruition. Um, but my guy Greg Cody, he's a columnist for the Miami Herald.
Okay.
He does a weekly spot on Dan Levitard's show. Um, that show is just so incredibly hilarious, and I've enjoyed their content forever. That the idea of kind of the role that he plays in that show, for him to be anointed as a fantasy expert, as the manager of Greg's Lobos. I just think that like the irony and the comedy there would be too good to pass up. So that's probably like a super selfish point of view on it, but I just think it would be hilarious to see that come to fruition.
That'd be cool. That'd be real cool. You could, if I was in charge of picking somebody and I was like, yo, can you come be I'll be your Joe. I'll be your Joe. You be my pro. I'd be like, Tony Romo, come join this league. So
Right. Predict
that's
what's going to happen next.
exactly. And then we would win and it'd be great. It would just be perfect. And you can come back on here next time and we could have a chat about how I won the second year of your league. But we're getting too far ahead of ourselves. Let's get back to what we're talking about, which is the league that's coming soon, the second year of the league. How pumped, how amped, how excited are you for this year two to be happening so soon?
Yeah, it's like a good combination of excitement and terror, right? When we kicked it off last year, we were operating with such a narrow margin that like we didn't really have time to think like, is this a good idea or can we pull it off? Right? It was just like only direction is forward. Like just have to keep marching. So to have a year to kind of sit back on it and think, um, it grew fast enough in year one to where now I feel like there's sort of a bar or a standard that we have to adhere to. So I want to make sure that I'm a good steward of that in year two. But with all of that kind of self doubt and anxiety swept under the rug,
Yeah.
I'm super pumped for year two. I've got my eye on a probably unrealistic fundraising goal, right? We're trying to at least double the amount of money that we raised this year. The people that we're bringing back in, like I said, we're shortening our roster. So, being very particular in who we invite back for year two, but also, really trying to put together an expansive list of different platforms, of different levels of experience, of different worldviews, right? And I'm super happy with the roster that we have and the people that are joining in year two. So I think it's going to be a ton of fun. I think we're going to do a lot of good.
And one of the concepts of the whole entire thing is that the pros have their charities that they're representing. What made you decide that that's the route you wanted to go, was to have each pro have their own charity that people could, donate to?
So it wasn't quite happy accident level, but at least it was inspired in that way. As we were doing our initial outreach and really kind of begging people to participate in those early days, one of the people that we reached out to asked if they can choose the charity that the money goes to, and that was kind of the light bulb moment where it's like, that's an awesome idea. Like, how can we do that? Because it fulfills a couple of things, right? Like it's a really effective like recruiting mechanism for us to be able to reach out to these industry experts and be like, hey, it's not, this giant cause that's raising, 7 or 8 figures every single year, right? Like if there is a local food bank in your town that's important to you, you can raise money to support that, right? If it's a disease that's touched your family, or if you are a dog person like Casey and I, right? Like anything that's important to them can be the cause that they support. So I think that it does give us a bit of an edge in terms of garnering that participation, because it's something that is of their choosing, and that goes into sort of that in-season experience side as well, right? Like if you're doing something that is going to benefit something that's important to you, at least the theory was that people would be more engaged and more willing to participate in that, and that's what we found in year one, right? We didn't have any issues with teams going dormant or pros being hard to get a hold of, and I think that played a little role in it.
I never even thought of that. I never thought, yes, people are going to want to be involved in something if they get to choose the yeah. Genius. That's genius. It makes a lot of sense.
I wish I could take credit for the idea, right? It was more of a suggestion.
But you ran with it, and now look where we are. So
yeah, and it is a mess to facilitate on the back end.
Yeah, I wanted to get into that because I know charity leagues look like fun and games, and everybody's having a good time. But the behind the scenes, I know there's a lot of ins and outs and steps to it all. So, what is the process going from where we are right now to the actual, like, let's just say from here to the draft? How do you prepare for that?
Yeah, in terms of like how do we sort of raise money between here and
so exactly what is the process between, like, right now at the moment that we are now to when we all come together to draft for the league? What goes on in that time period?
Yeah, so the easiest way to think about it is for each of our pros, we are running an independent sweepstakes. And that word is material. We can drill in on that in a little bit. So like I mentioned before, every pro is representing and playing for and raising money for the cause of their choosing. So through one of our partners on the back end, this awesome service that we stumbled into called Rally Up, we essentially set up an individual donor page and sweepstakes page for each of the pros that participates. And as people go to that page and they donate, they're entered into that sweepstakes, that drawing, where the grand prize is the opportunity to play with the expert that they've given to. And we're able to have multiple prizes in each of those drawings, right? A lot of people will throw in a premium sub or a podcast appearance or a T-shirt or whatever it might be. So we're essentially managing this year 42 different fundraisers all simultaneously. In terms of kind of browsing through that, it all starts at our website, proswithjoes.com. You register, and that'll take you to our donor center where you can see everyone who's playing, and you can see all of the causes that they're supporting. And then as you go in, essentially, the more that you donate, you can give a little, you can give a lot. That sort of informs or dictates how many entries you're given into that particular drawing.
It's awesome. And the website's really put together well, and everything just looks so nice and sharp. A lot of things that are just thrown together in 16 or 17 days, like the first go around, it's still, everything looked great. Everything ran on our end. Everything looked like it ran smoothly. And
totally how it happened.
So
nice and easy.
What is the importance of making sure that everything like looks good visually? Everything is visually there. Everything is, and like the Twitter account is visually there. You've got tweets coming out and everything. What's the importance of all of that?
Yeah. I guess kind of staying on the life advice thread, fake it until you make it, right? As we were stitching this together on the fly, there was a lot of conversation about, how can we make this happen, right? Like there were plenty of conversations or to the effect of, this is ridiculous. There's no way this is going to work out. But there were also ones where it's like, if we're going to go for it, like what are the things that are important? And that was one of the areas that we highlighted, right? Like we are asking people to trust us with their money. So we wanted to make sure that we presented in a professional fashion and in a way that would elicit or garner that level of trust. I appreciate your kind words about how clean it is. I look at it all the time and grumble under my breath about wanting to clean this up or, change around the way that it looks. But, put the emphasis on simplicity and consistency and
Hmm.
the things that, brands that handle people's money tend to do.
Yeah.
And at least per Casey's reporting, we
Hmm.
nailed it.
I mean, for real. A lot of things like I can't do any of that kind of stuff to save my life. Like I gotta have other people help me with stuff. How many people are involved exactly with running pros with shows? Is it just you, or are there other people that also help you out?
Yeah, so the we that I refer to in the past tense is my brother Rob.
Hmm.
He was the guy that actually originally reached out to Dave and really got the idea rolling. He was
Hmm.
also the MC for our live draft last year. Um, just kind of life considerations, he had to take a step back this year.
Right.
So in terms of running it on the back end, Rob and I were the dynamic duo last year. This year, I've got my buddy John Dansby, who's going to be the host of our podcast, which we're launching this year, and helping me dot all of our T's and cross all of our I's behind the scenes this year.
So tell me a little bit more about this podcast because this is intriguing to me. So give me a little backstory on what's going on here.
Yeah, so actually, I don't know if I've said this to you specifically or not, but Get Real is actually a big part of the inspiration for it. So,
Wow.
we want to do the kind of typical fantasy football things, right? Like a little bit of news and notes. We're going to host it weekly after waivers run. So we're going to talk about kind of team management and who to target and how who spent what on each money or who spent what amount on each player, I should say. Um, and try to be useful and helpful from a fantasy perspective, get everyone caught up on the state of the league. But the majority of the dialogue is going to be an interview with our pro and their corresponding co-manager, right? I think it's super interesting to hear about their stories, really drilling in on the cause that they chose to support, why it's important to them, how they got involved, things like that. And I also want to hear from the Joe, what it's like to pair off with this person who you've been a subscriber for 5 years, or that you've listened to every episode of their podcast, right? Like I think that those dynamics are super interesting. So that's where we're going to spend a lot of our time in the weekly podcast. But we're also going to check the boxes of who you should add or what's a good matchup for Thursday night and all of the kind of obligatory stuff so that we can fall into the fantasy category.
There you go. I like it. I like meshing all of that together. It's a nice balance. So, do you think that some people that want to participate in Pros with Joes, they go in there, they donate, they do all that stuff, and then in the back of their minds, they're like, I hope somebody, outbids me or wins or whatever above me or whatever, because I think I'll be too nervous to actually run a league or run a team with the person that I signed up for. You think there's some people out that are kind of like that?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I had people that I called to let them know that they had won last year that wanted to opt out.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so happy that I was selected. I was happy that I was able to play a role, but this kind of sounds like a little too much for me. Uh, and I mean,
That's cool.
I want to be respectful of that, right? But when that came up, I would offer up an anecdote that I learned firsthand, which is like everyone here is just a person, right? And
Yeah.
this community is amazing. It's welcoming, it's accepting, it's super friendly, right? Maybe it's because we're always
Hmm.
on live streams shouting about who should be in this tier or that tier, and there's that like kind of confrontational nature built into the content to where it feels like it might not be as welcoming as it really is. But there's a ton of warmth in this community. So I would just kind of share that anecdote, and almost everyone was like, "All right, I'll give it a go."
Yeah.
And a lot of them were ones that built super cool friendships with their partner.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's fair to feel intimidated, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
remember, fanboying for all these
Yeah.
podcasts that, I thought it'd be ridiculous to, have a random DM exchange with Stefania Bell. And she's like maybe the nicest person on the face of the earth, right? So it's super cool to sort of see people kind of step out of that comfort zone a little bit and then immediately be rewarded with reassurance that they made the right choice and that all these people are super cool and fun to work with.
And it really isn't something to be nervous about because everybody that's a part of it is a super awesome person, and you don't have to feel any sort of way. You just feel good knowing that, hey, I get to work beside so and so. And the concept is so great because a lot of times it's like pitting, these people that are analysts that are super, knowledgeable about it, players that are on the bottom of the roster. And then all of that. But this is more bringing the community together, and there's a lot of communication involved in this league that you have going on. How did you decide, like, communication is going to be the focal point? Slack, we're going to bring in, like, I never used Slack until until you guys came around. So how important is that communication and the communication tools?
Yeah, I think it's really critical. And to your question earlier about one of the things or some of the things that have changed this year, we did kick off with Slack last year. I'm sort of in the tech space, so I've used it a lot for work, and it was just familiar and easy. One less thing to think about. But I also think it's really important to meet people where they are, right? So, this year we're asking everyone their preferred means of communication, right?
Oh yeah.
Text group, Twitter DM, whatever it might be. Um, so we'll still have the Slack group up. I think we're really just putting the emphasis on having as many channels and avenues for connection as possible.
Right.
That communication is key, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
falling into that rhythm and that cadence is really where those one-on-one bonds were forged with Pro and with Joe. And it's a super cool way to see what everyone else in our little micro community is doing, right? Anyone that is in the fantasy space listening to this is probably a member of like a dozen or so retweet groups, right? So we kind of had our own where everyone, even across different platforms, by nature of participating in this thing together, it seemed like they were more inclined to want to help support and boost up the other people, the other members that were participating. Maybe this was the story that I was telling myself, but it feels like there was a good amount of that. So that was something that I think was sort of born of just how communicative the experience was last year.
And you know what? You're on the Slack game because as soon as I got an invite with you, then like now everybody uses Slack. So I'm gonna say I know Slack's been around for a while. My wife uses it for work. The footballers use it, but I was like, oh, I got another form of communication. There's so many apps out there now that you were talking about. There's a million different apps out there too that people communicate with. So it is cool that we could choose this year, like what the best way to communicate. I love that. I love whenever it says, do you want to talk on the phone or do you want to like use text? I always like text. Who wants,
Yeah,
but I do like the face-to-face thing. And that's what's cool about the league that you have going on is the face-to-face, able to video chat prior to the season starting and then the holiday party afterwards and everything in between. Why did you decide, like, we're going to do this holiday party, for instance? Why did you decide, like, this kind of thing sounds like a cool thing to do a virtual, since, we had to do virtual, but,
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's probably another one of those like selfish answers where like
be selfish.
I was looking up at the end of the year, right? And like we all know like the blues of like oh man, it's week 14. Like we only have like you start counting
Mm.
on your fingers how many weeks you have left.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I just kind of got retrospective, right, about how unlikely it felt like any of this would come together, and how relatively speaking, relatively smooth it played out. So I was feeling in a celebratory mood and wanted to bring everyone together. And I thought that it would, really tie into, the concept around meaningful connections that we set out trying to achieve. So, I wish I could tell you it was this like well forged master plan where, I knew this was going to be the icing on the cake, but really I just kind of got the end of season blues and wanted to get everyone together one more time.
You know what? That's fine. I love getting together with everybody. Meeting new people through those kind of things are also super awesome, and that's what this whole league's about: is meeting people, and I just love that whole thing. I want to get to back to the charity aspect. I want to know more about not just people's charity, but I want to know about people who have leagues currently going on and they want to add a charity aspect to the leagues that they have. What do you think is something that they can do right off the bat that's something that's not even that hard to do that can add a charity aspect to their league?
Yeah. I mean, I think the easiest thing to do is the drum that Scott Fish has been banging forever, right? Which is like take a little bit of your pot and donate it to charity. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to miss it. You'll feel good about it, right?
Right.
Um, that's probably an overly simplified answer, but there's beauty in that simplicity, and I think that's the reason why Scott keeps going back to that line. If you want to make it fun, like I know that a lot of people like to do the like last place punishment kind of game, right? And instead of like getting a horrible tattoo or having to like humiliate yourself in public, something where it's like last place makes a donation to the winner's charity kind of thing. Um, I mean, really just make it your own, right? Like I think the idea behind this league and how sort of connected everyone is something that you can very much so take to your home leagues, and just pose these ideas, right? Like talk with your league mates more often. See what they would be comfortable with. So there's really no right or wrong way. There's no amount that's too small. That's a huge lesson that I learned getting to know some of these charitable organizations over the course of the last year. Like the shit they do with like nominal amounts of money is magic. Like it's insane how far they stretch a dollar, right?
Yeah.
So, kind of arm yourself with that reality and go out there and make the ask. I don't think that you're going to find a whole lot of people that's going to be the jerk who are like, nah, I don't want my $10 going to help a dog or to feed a kid. Like,
Yeah, right. Yeah, the charity thing. And another thing about the charity thing, now that you're talking about feeding a kid and helping a dog out and everything. Also with the charity leagues, guys, you look at it, it's another league, right? And yes, I love having another league. To justify it to your spouse, you say, I'm in a charity league. It's a charity league. This is for charity. Drill that into your spouse's brain, and you can be in as many leagues as you want as long as they're charity leagues. So get out there and join your charity leagues.
big facts.
I mean, it's called life hacks for a reason. There's a life hack right there. I want to know because I see on the website the wonderful put together website that's nice and clear right there, right when you get on the website. It says powered by, and there's a name. What's going on there? Let me know. That wasn't there last year. So what's going down?
Yeah. So this year we are powered by drroto.com. It is maybe not the newest, but one of the newer premium subscription sites out there. I got to know Doc last year. He was one of our pros, and his story is incredible. Actually, I think he recently told a little bit of it when we launched the site a few weeks back. If you head over to drroto.com on Twitter, fantasy football legitimately saved this dude's life. he was going through kidney failure, and he went onto his Twitter and updated his followers, his fans, as to what was going on with his life, and he actually found a kidney donor through that outreach. So like talk about the power of this
Yeah,
community.
right.
Like this man is legitimately here right now because of his connection to the community, right? So the basis in that story, I think there's a lot of alignment around it, and just the nature of what he's doing over at drroto.com. It is entirely about giving back, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's been in the industry long enough. He has climbed every mountaintop that is out there, and now he really wants to leave a legacy of doing good. So he's putting together kind of like these content camps. He's helping people that are trying to find their voice and find their way in the content game. Every single month, he's got a number of charities that he's supporting that they're giving a percentage of subscriptions to. And then obviously we're rolling into this. He's helping share his platform and helping us raise more money by shining a little bit of light on what we're doing. So it seemed to make a whole lot of sense as we were talking about it, just given the amazing reach of his power,
Yeah.
of his amazing power of his story, I should say, and just how much reach the platform has
Yeah.
for us to do some more good in year 2.
It's so awesome to see so many people in this community and in this industry that are just kind-hearted people, and that story right there just shows you what kind of people are in this community. That kind of brings a tear to your eye when you hear the story, I've heard his story before, but to hear it again, it's just like,
It's
it's
wild, yeah.
it's
Like
crazy. It is, and
someone gave him part of their body to save
yeah,
his life,
that is
right? And
so
like
awesome.
the only tie that binds is like we like to convert yardage into points and yell at our screens every Sunday.
Hey, you know what? That's awesome though. And how how did you even find out about the fantasy football community in the first place? Because like when I talk to my friends, they have no idea that like Twitter exists to a point. I mean, they know Twitter exists, but they don't know fantasy football Twitter exists. So how did you stumble across all of that?
Yeah, it is an accurate representation to say that I stumbled across it. Um, I don't remember exactly the turn where I was sort of brought into the Twitter world. I remember on a lot of the different content outlets that I was consuming, people started referring to follow me on Twitter. Here's my handle, and like I was just too cool for school. Like not on any social media, not really all that into it. My brother-in-law randomly got me into Twitter, and it was specifically around fantasy football. He's like, these are 4 or 5 follows that are hilarious, but also every Sunday morning I'll at these 3 or 4 experts, and they'll help me like tweak my lineup. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. I can get into that. So that was kind of the impetus behind me jumping on to fantasy football Twitter. In terms of how I got involved, so my handle at Fantasy Nav is an homage to a failed attempt to dive into the industry. I spun up a crappy little site, fantasynavigator.com. And it was kind of the love child of my experience trying to interact on fantasy football Twitter. I think I was a little too late to the game. So like as I would at people, like the amount of responses I got were like next to none. And actually like I felt like a certain kind of way about it. I was like, man, that sucks. Like I'm here asking a question, I can't get an answer or whatever. And so I set out with the hope of just like catching all of the unanswered questions. That's actually how I got to know Dave Richard originally. He's like, hey, I think it's super helpful that you're responding to questions that are sent at me. But could you take me out of the response so you don't drown my mentions? Because like in reality, like, to your point at the top, like we all only have so much time in our day, right? So
Yeah.
like I was sitting there kind of disgruntled, like, man, I can't even get my question answered. And on the other side of the screen, it's like, shit, I only have 5 minutes and there are 500 questions coming in. Like, I'm not going to be able to get to everyone.
Yeah.
So that was, where I kind of started to make the transition into the fantasy world in a little bit more of a meaningful way. And then really it was last year as the league spun up that I was introduced to a handful of people. I started making the rounds, promoting the charity, and had a few people mention like, hey, like you make words good on podcasts. Would you want to do a podcast more regularly, or have you thought about writing? So it's another kind of love child of this crazy ride that I've been on for a few years.
Which one do you prefer more, writing or podcasting?
I'd say podcasting, because it's just instantaneous, right? Like,
yeah,
I've written plenty, and I think I'm kind of comparable in either medium. But writing, like I'll sit there and sweat over every word and like read it and reread it. Whereas podcasting, like it's much more stream of consciousness. You make a statement and it's gone, right? There's no there's no control alt delete. There's no going back and clipping that out. So I kind of like that medium because I tend to overanalyze things, right? And in the recorded and live stream world, it's just like once you said it, it's out there, and there's no going back, and that finality makes it a little bit easier for me to process.
The first time that you ever got behind the microphone and did a podcast, do you remember how you felt prior to the podcast starting?
Yeah, I was terrified. And I mean, it was right in the midst of us just getting started, right? So like there was already this undercurrent of imposter syndrome, right? And then to sort of double down on that, and it's like, well, you're already feeling like an imposter about this charity league, but also we're going to have you interview on Michael Fabiano's show on Sirius XM. It's like, I do not belong here. So I mean, it was almost crippling. And it was one of those things where, leading up to it, it felt like paralysis, but then once you get going and the conversation starts flowing, you just kind of fall into a groove, and autopilot kicks in, if you will.
For sure. I think that's how it is for most people, but everybody looking at, or listening to us talk, they don't realize like that's how it is. When you're listening to people talk, You're like, okay, cool. Like they're just having a conversation. You don't really know that those two people were just like sweating before they got behind the microphone and start talking to each other. So it can be scary, to get behind the microphone. To put it out there like that, it is. But yeah, like you said, kind of the gears kick in and you start flowing with it.
Yeah, the fact that once it's out there, it's done. Like there's some comfort in that, right? Like it took me a long time to go back and listen to anything that I recorded. I've just accepted that like I sound way better in my own head than I do in the real world. My wife was also kind enough to tell me that I sound like Marlon Brando eating dog food when I talk.
No, so, not right now.
None of you will be able to unhear that now. Just like I can't unhear that every time I hear recording. But I mean, like at a certain point, like you just kind of got to embrace it as that's you, that's your voice, and you're carrying on.
My wife won't listen to me podcast. She said that she's scared she'll get secondhand embarrassment from it. So she doesn't listen to it. So I have no idea what I sound like. I do know that I ramble a lot. I am one of those high energy people that just like rambles. I try to find the words. And sometimes they don't come to you as quickly as you'd like. So you try to get from point A to point B. And here we go again with the rambling. So you brought up your wife. How supportive is your wife in all of this?
Quite supportive. I mean, just the byproduct of how much time this takes up, right? Like, if she wasn't supportive, there's no way it could all come together. that doesn't mean that she's super happy about it, right? Like, a little bit of inside baseball. We're recording this super late at night because my kids are asleep, and that doesn't stick my wife holding that bag, right? But I mean, we find a way to make it work. And to your life hack earlier, right? Like, it is all to the sheet music of charity, right? So it's like,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
the more out there I am doing this thing, promoting and shining a light on it, the more money we're able to raise, right? So she
Mm-hmm.
can certainly get behind that. But yeah, we definitely do some Tetrising on the schedules to make sure that, while I'm back recording or whatever it might be, writing an article or configuring the league, that she's not stuck with two screaming kids. We try to make it work.
That sounds like a lot of stories that come on this show. I don't have any kids, so I don't know that whole struggle of like getting them to sleep and then finding the time to actually like record and write and do all that. I can't even imagine. It's already hard enough trying to figure it out, not having that. Like, I don't know. How do you manage to not burn out?
I mean, I guess that assumes that I haven't burnt
Haven't.
out. I mean, anytime that I've answered a question along these lines, to
Mm-hmm.
the last point, I always just point back to my kids. Like, there is nothing more intense than being a parent. um, like everything is super extreme. Whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it's frustration, like, the dial is turned all the way to 11 all the time when you're with your kids. And as a parent, you learn to be like scary efficient. Like, the ability to like get like 5 or 6 things done in the 6 minutes that your kid's eating lunch, is like one of those things that, like, nobody can really explain to you how it works, but once you're in it, it just becomes innate. So time management is like the low key superpower of every parent in the world. So whenever I don't have my boys with me, it feels like I've got all the time in the world, and I'm like mad efficient in getting stuff done, because that window is narrow, right? Like, unless they're asleep, they're probably going to be all up in my business in the next 20 minutes. So like, I got to knock some shit out,
Being all up in your business, I mean, with COVID and everything, I'm sure that didn't lessen them being up in your business. I'm sure you had a lot more of them being in your business. So, how did you have to navigate that whole thing? I know it's still going on. How have you been navigating it?
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, who knows where we're headed with this Delta variant thing? But right now they're both back in school. And my God, if I didn't appreciate teachers before, Scott Simpson, shout out. I know that we got some teachers out in the fantasy community. They are the saints and miracle workers that none of us deserve. They're better than we deserve. We had our kids out. We had both of them out for like a good 9 months. It was right around spring break in 2020, where school shut down here in San Antonio, where I live. And my youngest didn't go back to daycare until November or so. We like randomly and luckily found this daycare that's like an outside certified classroom. So like, they're outdoors 90% of the day. It's like perfect for pandemic times. And then we got my oldest back into school right after spring break of this year. So I mean, it was wild, right? To take everything that we knew of parenting before and now make it a 24/7 game, right? To try to incorporate those educational aspects, and at least in my case with two boys, is to try to like keep them off of each other, was wild. Like, we were constantly taking walks and just doing things where we were keeping them separated. My wife would teach math to my oldest, and I would take my youngest for a walk through the neighborhood, and then she would take my oldest for a bike ride, and I would do like shapes and puzzles and stuff with my youngest. It's just like the juggling act was wild. Um, I'm even getting a little like twitchy just recalling that 9 months or so because it was insane.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Wow. Yeah, I've heard lots of stories and none of them I mean, it's great to be able to spend extra time with your kids and stuff. And we all know that, but yeah. It does seem like a lot real quick. So,
I mean, that's the thing, right? Like it is a world of extremes. So
mhm.
like you have those extreme highs where it's like, man, like right now is super scary, but like I'm sure in a few years looking back, to be like, hey, we had like a year with just us. Like that's beautiful, you know? But then like one of them like breaks a chair over the other one's back. And it's like, I hate every moment of this.
No, don't do it. And then on top of that, okay, so at the towards the beginning part of the year, like Texas was just totally shut down and disgustingly disgusting with ice and snow and no power. Did you have power or did you lose power? How was that whole situation?
Yeah, Snowmageddon 2021. So we mostly had power. I think our longest stretch was like 13 or 14 hours or so. Um, but if you've heard anyone talk about the Texas snow apocalypse, um, the to say that we only had one long stretch without power is not really telling the full story because what was happening a lot towards like day 3, day 4 was like it would flip on just long enough for you to like start the burner and start cooking some food, and then like right before it got warm, it would just die out again. So it's
Yes.
just like the second it was like I'm trying to think of the game. Maybe it was like musical chairs. Like we were doing whatever in the house, and the second the lights flipped on, you just dropped whatever you're doing, and it's like start a pot of coffee, throw this food on. You know,
Mhm.
just every single thing, like all
Yep.
these creature comforts that you don't think about. Like we were just trying to jam it all in. And inevitably, like Lucy pulling away the football right as we got it started, the power flipped off, and
Mhm.
we're back in the cold and back in the dark. Uh,
Every single
so I
time.
mean, all told, like I feel like we were in kind of like above average shape, right? We didn't have
Yeah.
a crazy long stretch. We've got neighbors that are a couple of blocks over that didn't have power for 3 days consecutively, right? Um, Honestly, probably the most frustrating part of it. We got through the first night. We didn't bust any pipes. We've got a super old house, so we were like, these pipes are just going to all explode. We didn't bust any pipes. They thawed out. We got water running. And then for whatever reason, that day, my dog decided that he was going to chew on the hose bib that was keeping our pipes outside from defrosting. And he pulled this old ass pipe out of the ground. So, like, we
Oh.
thought we were like unscathed. We had water at least. And then all of a sudden, we're just like gushing water out of the backyard. And we had to turn it off at the main. And at that point, plumbers were like, "Oh, I can see you in 10 days." So I mean, it was fine, right? Like we filled up the bathtubs with snow, and as it melted, used that to wash stuff and got
Yeah.
bottled water. But I mean, it was scary there for a few days. Like there was talk of like our independent power grid like not being able to recover from this.
Yeah.
um, so I mean, I'm glad we're on the other side of it. I don't know if we're gonna learn our lesson, but let's hope.
I mean, and people died because I mean, not having just yeah. And so it was a lot. And all the grocery stores are just throwing out food and it's like and you can't we needed batteries for our fireplace when the power went out and yeah, so my wife's like skating across the street to go over there, but their power's out, so they can't like ring her up or anything. I don't just give her the damn batteries.
The craziest thing about it, like the thing that I remember walking away from that experience with is like just how close we all live to pandemonium and
Yeah.
never even realize it. Right? Like
Right?
a couple of little things go wrong and like it's just chaos.
Yeah.
And like it's kind of right there
Mm-hmm.
at all times. So I mean, it was wild. Like we were out there, foraging for propane tanks so we could cook outside
Yeah.
instead of depending on our electricity inside, and filling up small gas cans because when the power goes out, you can't pump gas, right? Like all these little things you don't think about.
Mm.
They become real, real quick in those moments.
And you may have said this earlier and I just missed it. How old are your kids?
My oldest, Gus, will be 7 next month. And then our baby, I guess we can call him that, Samson, will be 4 in November.
So how'd they feel about the snow and everything?
Oh man, they were pumped.
Yeah.
My wife is from Philadelphia originally. We tend to go back there during the summer because traveling in that weather is just a mess.
Mm-hmm.
And they're always disappointed, like, oh, I didn't get to see snow. It's like, well, it's July, like,
Sorry.
sorry. And so like they woke up and like just everything had a good foot of snow on it, and it was like Christmas morning, right? Like they're running out there with like way too like not enough clothes on. Like as Texans, we don't have like the foundational shit you need to like navigate the snow. Like we don't have good boots, we don't have shovels. They're just like they were out there with like socks on their hands.
Yep.
Like, but I mean to be young, right? Like they were in hog heaven. And that first day was like kind of novel,
Yeah.
And then it was like the power went off and didn't come back, and it's like,
You're like, okay, this is too much now. The socks on the hands. I remember doing that as a kid because it rarely snowed in, Dallas. Yeah. And so we'd have them, and then the snow would stick to the hands, to the socks, and you'd big clumps of dirty snow. Okay, anyway. But it's fun. It's fun. So I hear a lot from like girl dads, but I don't hear a lot from boy dads on here. And my dad, I mean, he has 2 daughters. So you have 2 sons. How is raising 2 boys?
Man, it's wild. I don't know if there's like psychological aspects that go into it where like there's kind of like an innate competition between the 2 of them. The best way that I can think to describe it is like I sort of think of them as like planets or celestial bodies that are in orbit, and like over the course of the day, like their orbit gets a little bit tighter and a little bit tighter, and like before long they collide and they're wrestling, they're throwing stuff. So like they are legitimately like the best friends that anybody could ever ask for. Like anytime we're doing something with Gus, he's like, where's Sam? Anytime we're doing Sam, he's like, I want bro, right? Like they love the shit out of each other. But they love the shit out of each other, right? Like I don't know if you remember like the first time that like you saw like a puppy or a kitten and you're like, I just want to like pet all of the fur off. It's like that, but all the time.
Yeah. That's hilarious. I'm not trying to compare my dog to your kids, but I have a 2-year-old dog who is like that with his brother dog. Is like, leave him the fuck alone. He doesn't want you to be like following him everywhere and like being like a,
that's our dog. Like but, he's a bit older now, but like
yeah,
his worldview is one where he thinks like everyone is his best friend. So, like, he's just super intense around every person and every dog, and like he's mad dumb. So like no harm, no foul. He just comes in really hot,
I love it. How did he like the snow?
Yeah, I mean, he had enough fun pulling that pipe out of the ground, right?
I mean, is he the only dog you guys have? You guys have any other pets?
Yeah, just one dog. He's our OG. He's like a crazy mutt Shar-Pei retriever mix. Nobody can really pinpoint what he is.
Destroyer of pipes, all that jazz,
And only in that one day, like he's never had an accident in the house.
He chooses
one day.
Yeah, the perfect time. Jeez. I mean, it was something new. So, he's like, let's add some excitement to this already exciting day.
Wild
I
card.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a few questions real quick about just fantasy football in general, not like questions about players, but about like leagues and teams and settings and all that jazz. What's your favorite kind of league to play in, basically, like settings wise and rules, anything in particular that you like?
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Superflex leagues. And I think it's mostly because of how like in vogue the concept of waiting on quarterback is in the fantasy world, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to put that premium on the position, like it really just kind of goes against the status quo. And I think that anytime anything does that, it's more interesting, right? Um, so I definitely have more super flex leagues than anything. And in terms of like format, I'm seeing a ton more of this year. I've got a few leagues that were operating this way previously, but the ones that are constructed where it's positionless, it's like quarterback and 7 flexes. Like let's go. Like something that just totally gives the manager agency over their strategy, how they want to construct their team. All of the different wrinkles in scoring formats, I'm here for. It's actually something that I really leaned into over the course of the pandemic, as like we were talking about, like what are sports going to look like when they come back.
Yeah.
Like I just completely bought into the idea, like if it's going to be different, I want it to be like weird as shit. I want it to be really different. And so like the scoring format for Scott Fishbowl, right? Like every single year he's innovating and iterating on that. Just like the more creative, the more unique, the better. And that's one of the things that I looked for in those times where I had way too many leagues. Like the only stipulation that I really had was that like there was some differentiating factor from one league to another, right? Whether it was 12 team or 14 team, whether it was PPR standard, tight end premium, whatever it was, like get out there and mix it up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't want to be robots and have optimizers tell us how to fill our strat or fill our lineups every week, right? Like try something different.
Try something different. Love it. You really should. And there are people out there that don't know that there's a whole grab bag of things that you can do in fantasy, that there are so many options. They think that whatever is given to you by the platform you're using is just the way to go, and don't have all these. And like you were saying at the beginning, when you overheard and you butted into a conversation basically where they were doing rule changes and all that jazz, like how crazy is it to think of that as a concept, that there are people that don't know that there's all these wrinkles and stuff? And also, how can we get people interested in joining more creative leagues?
Yeah. I mean, I think a big part of it is just like exposure, right? Like really banging that drum out there and making it known that it is a thing. I mean, I think it would be cool if none of the platforms had a default setting.
Yeah.
So like the commissioner had to go in and like make like an outward choice on all of those things. Like I think that would provoke a bit more kind of scrutiny in the process instead of just like, yeah, refresh my league, we're good to go. I mean that would be crazy. I don't think any of them would do it, but that would be awesome, right? In terms of how to like institute that change, I mean just inject a little chaos, right? Like we're all in text groups and
Yep.
group me's and whatever it might be. Just like throw a question out there to your group, right? Like, hey, should we get points for first downs? And like, I guarantee you, there are going to be a few people that'll chime in and be like, "That sounds cool," Like, just mix it up, give it a go.
Mix it up and give it a go. For real, I love all the different league settings and stuff. What are the league settings like with the pros with Joes? What are those? How is it set up?
Yeah. So this year we've got three 14-team conferences that are essentially their own individual player pools. And then we merge those together at the end of the year and crown our eventual champion. In terms of scoring, we haven't published this yet, so I guess it's not super final. But we're going to stick with full PPR. Like I said, I'm a big fan of kind of the positionless play. So like 95% likelihood that we're going to have a quarterback, we're going to have a defense, and then we're going to have 6 or 8 or 9 flex spots. In terms of the bench itself, I'm a huge fan of deep benches. So, upwards of 9-10 bench spots as well. I think that those are little things that don't really feel like they're all that complex, right? But they add a degree of difficulty when you think about 14 teams that are going to roster like 20 or so players. Like that pool gets thin.
It does,
right? And the premium on good analysis and trusting your read goes up in those situations.
I love that. I love the deep benches. I love the fact that I know I'm going to probably learn a lot from whoever I get paired up with, because they're not going to know some of the players, and then they're going to have insight on players that I don't have insight on. Like that's what's really cool about that too. Like even if quote unquote pro, because I know some of us, we're not like pro, but whatever, quote unquote pro. We're still, we can learn from the Joe, like, and that's the cool part of this whole thing. So, thanks for coming up with that idea.
The power of fresh eyes, right? Like, when you're staring at something for a long time, you kind of get into these loops, right? Like process over results. We all like to hide behind that whenever our calls don't go our way.
Yeah.
But like you get someone that's, not as entrenched in that world, and, they might not bring up a different or a better analysis, but they might bring up a different way of thinking about the problem. And that's like where these super cool and creative problems get solved.
Excellent. Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead. I was saying, how are you today, talking about today, but it's really nighttime. I know you had brought up that it's nighttime, and it's a little past my bedtime. So what we're going to do now, Eric, I appreciate you coming on and talking with me and dealing with my hyper, I need to go to bed self. So thank you so much. And
it was a ton of fun spending some time chatting with you.
Can you go ahead and just let everybody know, like, where they can find your stuff, who you are, what all your handles, and this, that, and the other? Tell everybody where to find your stuff.
Yeah. So first and foremost, if you would be so kind, please consider supporting the charity. The best way to get involved with that, you can head to our website, proswithjoes.com. You can find us on Twitter @proswithjoes. Support can mean whatever it means to you, right? A retweet, a comment, a donation, right? Like all of those things snowball into, what we saw last year and what we're hoping for this year in terms of the amount of good that we're able to do. So first and foremost, please consider supporting the charity. It does a ton of good, and it's really, really appreciated. If for whatever reason you want to hear me make words, you can find me at FantasyNav on Twitter, and you can find my work at drroto.com. Like I mentioned before, we're partnered up with the Charity League there. You can also find my work at Going for Two on Saturday nights. I'll be doing a DFS preview podcast with my man Clay Hodges, and I'll be contributing some articles over on the Going for Two side as well.
Awesome. I look forward to all of that stuff. Like the podcast, the articles, everything. You're putting out so much awesome content, and the league is just so amazing, and the second year is going to be so badass. So thanks again, Eric, for coming on and talking about it. And I will link Pros with Joes. I mean, obviously, everything will be in the description. So if you guys want to go check that out, you can. Make sure that you come back next week for another episode, and stay rad.
gosh, I am a dork.